What's that?
Oh, sir, looks like a gun to me. Hey, just a moment. Oh, that's quite all right, sir.
Well, we're pleased to welcome to the program now Philip Agee. Welcome to Conversations. Welcome back to the United States, if I may say so.
Thank you very much.
And Philip Agee, of course, is an ex-CIA agent or a person involved with the CIA who's seen the light and changed his view of things and got into considerable personal difficulty with the United States over the years. And I wonder if maybe you could, Philip, just for some of the people who might not be directly familiar with it, your history. You were a member of the CIA, you were working as a CIA operative and so forth. Maybe
yes.
Share your own history, your own personal background.
Well, it goes back quite some years now. I was finishing my undergraduate studies at the University of Notre Dame in 1956 when the CIA came around and asked me if I would go into what they considered to be their most important training program, the way they would bring in the future executive leadership of the agency. And as I was going on to study law at that moment, I rejected the recruitment approach. But then about a year later, I was about to be drafted. It was when we still had compulsory military services.
Yeah.
And so I wrote off to the CIA because they had told me that if I hadn't done my military service, I could do it within this training program. And so I wrote back, and 6 months later I was in the CIA. And they sent me off to military training, basic training, and then officer candidate school. I was commissioned as second lieutenant, worked for a year as an intelligence officer in the Air Force, and then was transferred back to Washington. Went through the year-long training program there, and by the end of 1960, before 1960 was out, at age 25, I was down in South America running secret operations as a CIA officer undercover as a U.S. diplomat in the U.S. Embassy.
Having received a fairly good education in the process and the standards and the rigorous standards that they set, or...
You know, that's
am I correct? You think in terms of the foreign services being a very high calling, and you think of other services, but the quality of the people that they bring to that CIA activity, is it a high calling? Is it something
Well,
like
I would say in terms of the background and the conventional education, certainly very high. They took in about 50 to 55 people a year for this training program.
Yeah,
and that's not very many.
Not at all.
And the problem was that I left university with an honors degree in philosophy, but with no education. No political education, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a political education until I got down to Latin America. And I saw the realities of the situation down there. And little by little I came to understand that the things that I was doing was not really in the security interests of the United States. Rather, they were there for, or we were doing all these things for stability. And here I'm talking about propping up friends, political parties, interfering in elections, establishing trade unions, putting out literature of all sorts, of funding radio stations, all of what is known as covert action operations. And these are all based on the collection of intelligence, and then you use the intelligence to try to manipulate events in a foreign country. The end result was that we were seeking stability by propping up the traditional ruling classes of those countries, meaning what they call down there the oligarchies. These are the few families that over the many generations have been able to corner most of the wealth and income and the land in those countries. And so I gradually turned against the work, and eventually, after 8 years in Latin America, quit. But at that time, it was 1968 by then, I had no intention of writing a book. I was simply going to stay in Mexico and start a new life. I went to work with the company there, people I had met already when I was in the CIA, And I also re-enrolled in university. I went into a doctoral program in the National University of Mexico on Latin American history and culture and so forth. I thought maybe I might come back to the States to teach at one point. But about a year or year and a half after I had left the CIA, all those old pressures of secrecy and discipline and security consciousness had begun to fade away.
Yeah.
And as they faded, I began to think what had previously been unthinkable, and no one had ever done it before, that is to write a book about how the CIA operates abroad.
Yeah.
All the different types of operations, but with real operations. I'm describing what I and my colleagues had been doing.
Stuff. Yeah, right.
Yes. Well, I tried to start that book in Mexico, and I couldn't get the documentation I needed because I didn't have everything in my memory.
Yeah.
So, to make a long story short, I left Mexico, went to Paris, then went on to London, and 5 years after I had started, I had the book finished. And that is the book which is known as Inside the Company, CIA Diary.
Yes, right.
It was first published in Britain in order to avoid censorship in the States, and then it came out in, I think, now 29 languages.
Yeah, amazing. And what year did that come out then?
First came out in 1975, and it's still coming out.
Yeah, it's still coming out, and it's still a box of that because you're showing that. I wonder if we could back up a little bit. One goes to the CIA, and you think of many friends I have, or friends and acquaintances who had worked with the OSS in the Second War, and the growth of the intelligence capability of the United States, which many of the people feel they were serving good purpose when they were involved in that. And do you understand what I'm saying? And intelligence is important, government need information and so forth. When, if we have, did something change that put the United States into a position which seems now to be using covert action, this kind of intelligence gathering, to only prop up oligarchy governments? When did the United States go wrong, if they did, and why did the covert action and the work of the CIA become so important in terms of our foreign policy initiatives in view of the world, in your estimation? If you understand the transition I'm trying to see between the end of the Second War and that kind of thing.
Yes, it's easy. We could talk about this for hours, you know. But I think it really, if you want to put your finger on a particular moment, it's the passage of the National Security Act of 1947, which began the establishment, excuse me, was the, signals the establishment of the national security state in this country. And it grows out of economic problems after World War II, which were anticipated even before the war was over, which led to the Marshall Plan for reconstruction of Western Europe, which was unsuccessful. Most people think the Marshall Plan was a great success. In fact, it was a failure. And it required the military option taken in 1950 to remilitarize both the United States and Western Europe, with West Germany and the other NATO countries, but especially West Germany as the hub. It was the so-called dollar gap period in which there weren't enough dollars in Western Europe to buy exports from the United States to prop up the economy here.
You say the Marshall Plan was a failure?
It was indeed a failure.
Most people did not see it that way.
No, most people, the common interpretation is there was great success.
And I probably would have thought it was a great success until you mentioned it.
I can refer to you to some very interesting studies. Among others, the classic book which came out in the late 60s about this period, which is called The Limits of Power. It's written by Gabriel and Joyce Kolko. They are professors in Canada, and it is the story of the first 10 years. And they explode all these myths like the Marshall Plan. And in any case, the decision was taken in 1950 to increase the military budget many times over, and it got us on a national security militaristic footing. The CIA was part of that. And the CIA, from the very beginning, was not used just to collect intelligence. That's what one feels that intelligence service should do. Collect information, process the information, and then present it to the policymakers like the President, the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, for their decisions.
Yeah, but they got doing policy things, they're setting policy themselves and carrying it out.
Well, in actual fact, at the very first meeting of the National Security Council in 1947, after the bill was passed and signed by Truman, and Truman was in the chair at this meeting, the decision was taken to set aside $10 million